Okay, let's talk about your abstract. Before we get into what the abstract is, let's take a moment to notice a couple of things. Number one, the page header appears on the upper left-hand corner of the page. Now, the words running ahead no longer appear because that only shows up on the title page. So all subsequent pages, including the abstract, just has the page header that you typed. Now, in this case, we're going to just use the term ADHD as our page header. The second thing you notice is the page number appears on the upper right-hand corner as it started doing so in the title page. Third thing you'll notice is the term, the word abstract, is on the page, and that's on the first line of text. Now, it's just centered, and it's also just regular font. It's not bold, and it's not italicized, just regular font. On the next line that follows, you start typing your abstract. One thing to note is that it's block formatted, which means that it is not indented. On a normal paragraph in the paper, you would indent the first line, but in the abstract, you just start typing in the left margin because it's block formatted. Now, let's talk about what is the abstract. The abstract is a concise summary of the key points in your paper. So it should include a couple things that we're going to mention right now. One is the topic. So what is the major topic that the paper was centered around? In this particular ADHD example, the topic is the problem, is another way to look at this, is that we have many students in the US who are diagnosed with ADHD, and most of those students receive medication as their treatment. So we have a major problem there, lots of medicated children. Another thing to include is your research question. So what is the question that you're investigating? In this particular case, we're investigating the effectiveness of exercise treatment rather than medication treatment for ADHD. So what is the thing that you're trying to investigate? Another thing to include is your participants. So what was the sample? Who was included in that sample? For example, was it made up of fourth grade students, or was it high school students? Was it a mixture of boys and girls and so forth? Give the reader a sense of who was in your sample. The next thing to include is the methods. So mention, just real brief, was it an experiment? How many groups was in the experiment? Also, you might want to mention, maybe it was an ABAB design. Was it a correlation? Things like that. Just mention a little bit of the methodology of the paper. Another thing is, we haven't got to this point yet because this is just a research proposal, but later down the road, you want to mention something like the results. Oops, I misspelled that. You want to mention the results and the conclusion from those results. That's going to show up when you take Education 624. In this particular case, we're just focusing on this portion of the key points of the paper. Now, one last thing to note about the abstract is that it's relatively brief. We're talking 150 to 250 words. And that brief summary needs to incorporate these major points here for this particular paper. Also, it's a double space, just like the rest of the paper. And you want to try to get it onto one page. You don't want to go onto the second page. So it's relatively brief. Maybe stay in the middle of that range, 200 words or so, and accomplish these major goals. Okay, so that concludes the discussion of the abstract.